Good morning. My name is Tim Rusbridge and I'm the Event Director for All Energy Australia. And on behalf of Reed Exhibitions and my team and I would like to officially welcome you to the third of our 6-week virtual conference. I begin by acknowledging that I'm on the land of the Gadigal and the Birra people, the traditional custodians of the land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's been a challenging year for everyone. I'm sure we find ourselves, like many others, having to adapt to ensure we're able to continue to operate as business as usual. To us, this meant unfortunately cancelling our physical events and pivoting to a digital offering. We've been delighted with the response from the industry and are grateful to all the speakers that have offered their support in launching the first digital event. I'd like to thank our key strategic partners, the Clean Energy Council, for their valuable input and insights into putting together our 6-week virtual program, and also a special thank you to our sponsors for the session, FEMA. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our chair for this morning, Sam Craft. Sam is the Director in Experienced Operations at NRG Solar. She implements and develops key strategic initiatives to strengthen and encourage professional, valuable, and customer-focused experiences. Sam is also Director and Board Member at the Smart Energy Council. All presentations will be available on our website at the end of the week, so please do visit www.allenergy.com.au. Thank you.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Clean Energy Council Energy Storage Residential and Commercial webinar. Battery storage is growing and changing our industry, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone discuss their experiences in the market and what is driving battery uptake. Questions can be placed in the Q&A section and will be answered at the conclusion of the session. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Jason Venning. Jason was appointed Country Manager of Firma Australia in March 2020. After the acquisition of the ABB Solar business, with more than 28 years experience in the electricity, power generation and water infrastructure industries, he has extensive experience in leading teams and driving business performance, as well as project managing large-scale projects and programs of work. Most recently, Jason managed the ABB Solar business in Australia, which included responsibility for New Zealand. Jason holds a Bachelor of Engineering degree from Curtin University of Technology and a Masters of Business Administration from the Chiefeley Business School and La Trobe University. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks very much, Sam. It's great to be here. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen so we can kick things off. All right. Is that coming through okay, Sam?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, look, really good to be here on this panel today, and FEMA is very happy to be sponsoring this particular panel as part of the All Energy Virtual Conference 2020. Some fantastic speakers on the panel. So I will launch into things. As Sam said, I'm the Country Manager for FEMA in Australia and New Zealand, and it's been around 9 months now since the sorry, I'll just get the slide to change, maybe. There we go. So obviously the topic today is around energy storage, residential and commercial. So I'll start with a quote that I found, which I think sums up certainly what I view as the key role that energy storage will play now and into the future as part of the overall renewable energy mix. Now, I think energy storage or grid firming capability, however you want to put it, is, as it says here, going to be a really vital element for the continued growth of renewable energy, because you've all seen in the news issues about grid stability, increasing penetration of renewables causing issues. So storage is certainly going to be a major way we're going to fix that particular issue and maximise the penetration of renewable energy into Australia's grid into the future. So I'll talk about three things today. I'll look at a brief overview of the concept of smart grids and energy storage part in that, barriers and keys to growth in energy storage, and also towards energy independence. So I'll talk a bit more about what that means a little bit later on. So the grid itself is changing, and that rate of change is increasing faster and faster as we go along. Energy storage has been identified as a significant tool for the future of the coordinated and reliable operation of utility grids. And that includes behind the meter installations, because the take-up of residential and increasingly commercial solar PV is massive in Australia, and that's causing its own issues which need to be addressed, and energy storage is going to be part of that solution. So it's particularly important in that case for the integration of these distributed renewable energy sources in order to make sure we maximise the penetration of renewables and minimise the negative impact on the grid. So for example, energy storage can help smooth the peaks and troughs on the renewable energy output. It's an obvious application. And it can also help in areas against forecasting. So sudden changes in demand, energy storage can be called upon to meet the shortfall where other energy sources may not be ready to provide that. You can shift demand peaks by storing off-peak energy, provide frequency regulation. We've seen that a lot at the grid level or front of the meter side of things. So making sure the right amount of energy is distributed to end users is becoming ever more critical to our grid infrastructure. So too much energy can wreak havoc on at a consumer level, industrial level products, for example, electronics, and too little can lead to brownouts and disruptions to service. So we need to find that balance. And things like smart meters, sensors, and advances in communication networks are required to enable us to get the full benefits of renewable energy and also storage systems. So we've got control systems that have to be implemented to deal with multi-directional power flows. That will become more commonplace in a fully developed distributed market. And on the other side of things, other issues to look at is things about data ownership, cybersecurity and privacy as more behind the meter assets do get integrated into the grid. So there's a number of elements that form part of a smart, flexible energy system. Obviously, we've got energy storage, which is the topic for today, and that's linked quite strongly to DER, demand side response, and also smart networks. Storage allows us to generate energy efficiency improvements, management of demand. And one of the key things is having some real-time and accurate consumption data. So smart meters are a very important part of the mix. And as I've said earlier, with these types of pieces, we can maximise the efficiency and reliability and resiliency of our networks when we've got a lot of renewable energy. So energy storage, well, it's a significant tool, as I've said, and particularly important for the integration of renewable generation. So one of the key trends that I'm certainly seeing is around this concept of virtual power plants. So we're seeing a lot of them moving in 2019, 2020 from what we could call a trial phase. And now they're actually becoming a real thing that's generating benefits and really demonstrating proof of concept that this kind of VPP setup can work. And we're seeing more technology providers, more product manufacturers and more networks, and also third-party companies, monitoring companies getting into this market to make it work. So it's a very interesting development and one to watch closely. So residential and C&I, that's what we're talking about today. So energy storage for C&I can deliver some obvious benefits. So if you're talking about whether it's a factory, warehouse, or what have you, obviously having a battery there can enable you to do a number of things to reduce your energy costs. So you've got peak shaving to generate savings on your electricity by reducing your peak demand. You can maximise your solar self-consumption, and you can manage your loads better and that also gives you savings on additional energy costs through not being hit by higher tariffs during peak times, etc., and transferring your energy demand from the grid to times when it's going to be cheaper to buy that energy. So very important from a C&I perspective. Also on the residential side of things, so as I said earlier, I mean, the demand for solar is really, really strong here in Australia, and storage, whilst not being as strong, it's certainly catching up, and it really is the future. So, you know, all of this is happening despite changes in government incentives and connection policies that really have not been ideal. But at the same time, homeowners or prosumers, however you'd like to call them, they're wanting more higher levels of control over their energy use. They want to be able to monitor things wherever they might be, and they want to store energy and only use it when they need to. So that's creating more demand for solar inverters with integrated storage, for example. So barriers to energy storage. Well, there are quite a few, and I'm pleased to say I'm seeing some things that are helping to fix this. But I mean, some of the barriers, obviously cost, particularly at a residential level. I mean, batteries, the current technology, I mean, there's no denying it's still expensive. Depending on where you live in Australia, you could find that it pays itself off in less time or more time, depending on how much you're paying for your power. So there's still not necessarily a financial argument that's overwhelming, but that's getting better over time. You've got to think about things like safety and quality and perceptions like that. People out there who can do the job properly and safely from an installation perspective. Government policy. I mean, things are getting better, as I'll show shortly, but you know, there's been a lot of confusion and complication around legislative and regulatory frameworks. Some lack of uncertainty. I mean, governments have been trying to do their bit by putting schemes in place, but it's not helped by rule changes or you know, doing things on the fly, which means the industry can't really plan for this and leads to these peaks and troughs, which is not good for the installers who need a steady flow of business rather than this feast and famine type model, which you're seeing in some states. And also, you know, unnecessary, well, I'll say from my point of view, unnecessary red tape. Like, for example, home battery installation standards that have come in recently. They're doing it for the right reasons, but perhaps some of it might be seen as gold plating and unnecessary, and also adding cost to a battery installation for a home that possibly is not justified from a safety perspective. And also, one of the key things is networks are used to making their money, getting a guaranteed revenue stream by building more poles and wires, building new substations. So it's a real paradigm shift for them to see the value or realise the value or how to extract the value from using these behind the meter assets as a way to mitigate or remove the need for major grid upgrades. So there's a whole mind shift there. And also, last but not least, smart meters are an important part of allowing the control of these behind the meter assets, which is particularly important for storage. And I mean, Victoria's got about 98% penetration of smart meters. New South Wales possibly about 35 from figures I've seen, but a lot of the other states, smart meters are just going in for new builds or as old meters need to be replaced. So there's not a lot of uniformity there. We'd really want to see the smart meter rollout accelerated so you maximise the opportunities for use of these behind the meter assets. So what are the keys to growth for energy storage? So clearly electricity prices. I mean, the higher they are, the more you have to pay for your electricity, the more the economic case stacks up for storage. So that's a driver for sure. Reduction in prices of the systems, and that may include some incentives as well as the actual equipment itself. The phase out of these initial high feed-in tariffs for solar PV mean people aren't earning as much as they used to for selling power back to the grid. So it's driving behaviour change for them. So there's more value for them in having storage, storing their own energy and using it themselves rather than selling it. Consumers are coming around to the fact that storage is a good idea for all those reasons above. as I mentioned before, the rollout of things like smart meters and sensors and advanced networks are happening, and that is facilitating the growth in energy storage, or the opportunities for energy storage. Energy market and policy reform, which I'll touch on shortly, is also helping. And there's a lot of new and interesting business models coming out where people are providing different ways for people to buy or finance an energy storage system, be it on a commercial level or residential, which means there's no reduction in upfront cost. So people don't have to worry about shelling out thousands of dollars up front. Someone else can take care of that, and then they effectively pay for the system in another way rather than through a huge capital cost. So that's also helping. So energy market and policy reforms, well, there have been some quite big ones that are helping the penetration or increase in energy storage. So the AER is also helping to support this. Investment in demand management innovations. So shifting away from investing in new network assets, but providing support for things like residential battery storage projects, and also some of these technology trials as to how we can integrate this and make it all work together properly. Now, we also have some governments around the country providing support of various forms to facilitate the installation of battery storage, whether that's grants or rebates or loans. So, I mean, they're all good things, and certainly good at the start of an emerging market like storage. Over time, I'd like to think that they're not so necessary, and that this technology can show it can pay for itself and doesn't need significant subsidies. But clearly for now, I'll take that as being a good thing for storage. So ARENA's done some funding for a trial. You've probably seen it promoted recently. So a VPP trial involving certain inverter manufacturers, product manufacturers, and some networks and third-party monitoring and control companies to, again, run a bit of a VPP trial over a prolonged period. Again, just to further promote proof of concept and make sure that things are going to work. So in Western Australia, you can see they've got buyback scheme there, and also electricity pricing reforms to optimise the benefits of DER. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to go to the next slide. There we go. So the current battery storage market has proven quite stable. It is growing. Some states obviously doing better than others, like South Australia is one example. So VPPs are becoming more of a driver of the market, and now they're actually delivering results, not just being a trial. So quite a lot of installations in 2019. And then 2020 is expected to, be a bit higher again, but that's obviously also driven by grid scale batteries. And last but not least, to sort of summarise, consumers will increasingly find that it's benefit to store their surplus energy from their solar systems in batteries. Things like DER can help them to allow better control of their electricity use and power bills. And if it's properly integrated with the power system, it can help manage these demand peaks and also security issues in the grid. And technology is always improving over time. So that really helps to make the business case and the success of battery storage behind the meter better. And there's value generation for the customers, be it residential or commercial. So thank you very much for your time. Great to be a member of the panel. And I'll pass you back to Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Totally agree. Energy storage is a vital element for continued growth in this sector. I really like the way you've spoken about a balance and a need for transparency, which then allows control of storage assets to being key for residential and commercial customers. I think, independence and control is a huge thing for them, and the peak shaving and VPPs is a huge part of that. So thank you.
No problem.
I would like to now introduce you to Rick. Rick Brazel has been involved in the renewable energy sector for more than 30 years and was on the initial government industry working group that worked on developing and implementing the mandated renewable energy target. Prior to establishing the Green Energy Group in 2008, Rick was the Executive Director of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, now the Clean Energy Council. During this time, Rick was actively involved in the development and implementation of a broad range of solar energy and energy efficiency policies and programs, including participating on the government's initial REC Advisor Committee. As a leading advocate for the sustainable energy in Australia, Rick has developed a deep and thorough understanding of the business issues affecting the sustainable energy sector and the energy sector more generally. Rick has participated in a wide range of government and industry consultative groups and has developed critical insights into policy, market, and regulatory environments surrounding energy and greenhouse. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you for the introduction, Sam. In the 15 minutes or so that I'm presenting to today, my focus will be on the rooftop solar market and associated battery storage. Okay, the key points I'd like to get across in my presentation is that this year, 2020, will be another record year for rooftop solar, but it does beg the question as to whether we've actually reached peak solar. Solar's starting to cause some headaches and starting to face some headwinds. Jason's talked about some. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of those. And lastly, we're starting to see the emergence of some state-based market programs that could help drive battery storage, and I'm going to touch on those. Just a bit about Green Energy Trading. I won't say too much. We're an independent rec agent with offices in New South Wales and in Melbourne. And the key point is our associated company, Green Energy Markets. We do quite a bit of consultancy advisory, and I'm going to be drawing on a couple of reports that we've done over the last year or so, including one for AEMO on the outlook for solar PV and battery storage. Okay, so looking at 2019, it was a record year for solar in Australia. And let me just spend a little bit of time unpacking this slide. So what we're showing here is the installed capacity on a megawatt basis, generally DC for rooftop and AC for utility scale. So yeah, you can say it's not. So technically, AC is lower and DC is higher, but you get the general drift of the analysis here. Looking at the composition of each year, the green bars refer to residential installations. The yellow bit is commercial or C&I. Now, the green and yellow are systems eligible for the Small Scale Technology Scheme, STCs. So that means they're less than 100 kilowatt. The light blue bit that you can just see is what we refer to as small power stations. So these are systems above 100 kilowatts, so not eligible for STCs. They're eligible for large-scale renewable energy certificates, but less than 5 megawatts DC. So typically, these are larger systems sitting behind the meter. So they're also rooftop systems, but they're not eligible for the small-scale scheme. And then lastly, the dark blue is utility-scale solar. And so you can see that utility scale solar has really come of age over the last 3 years with a surge in capacity installed. So 2019 was a record, as you can see in that chart. 2.3 gigawatts of solar was installed last year. And we think, given the level of projects, large-scale solar projects under construction and committed, we think that probably 2021 will hit peak solar at 4.6 gigawatts. And you can see in total installed capacity, we're seeing 2024. But if we strip out the utility scale solar and really just look at the rooftop market, which is what I'm going to present today, we can see that 2020 will be likely the peak year at just under 3.1 gigawatt of installation. And we're expecting the market to come off next year and probably beyond that as well. And I'll touch on some of those figures later in the presentation. So just in terms of looking at a couple of things that have been driving the growth, and again, I won't dwell on too much on this because it's pretty well understood if you've been rattling around the solar industry for the last couple of years. Firstly, the number of systems installed, which is the left axis and the green bars, we hit over 350,000 back in 2011 when we had quite attractive feed-in tariffs and rebate schemes, dropped dramatically. But interestingly, we expect this year, 2020, to probably exceed the massive numbers of systems that were installed back in 2011. So we could see peak system numbers this year. And so that's over 350,000. The line you can see slowly snaking its way upwards is the average system size. And so back in 2010, even in 11 for that matter, the average system size was less than 2 kilowatts. We'll be around 8 kilowatts per system this year. And the way it roughly breaks down is for a residential system where the average size is around about 7 kilowatts a system. And for what we call commercial system, it's about 20 kilowatts. Now, these are systems that are eligible for STCs that we're talking about here. So in addition to that, there's another about 150 megawatts or so of what we call small power stations, which are above 100 kilowatts but less than 5 megawatts. If we sort of look a little bit behind that on a monthly basis, and this is a chart that shows the sort of the light green is residential system capacity, and then the blue and the dark green are we've broken it down into a relative size of systems. So the light blue is commercial systems greater than 15 kilowatts. We've got this little bit in the middle, which historically had been commercial but is tending towards residential now, 10 to 15 kilowatts, and then sort of the residential systems, which is the light green bit, which is less than 10. So we can see on a capacity installed basis quite a surge from the, call it 50 megawatts being installed back a couple of years ago. We now have got 5 times that level with 250 megawatts being installed. Interesting to note that the growth has sort of seems to have petered out a little bit over the last couple of months, and the last column there is in September. And that's driven predominantly by the lockdown in Victoria. And I'll touch on that in the next chart. So what we're showing here is the capacity installed on a monthly basis, and going back over the last sort of 12 months or so. And we're showing, I suppose we're showing the only the key states. So we've just looked at New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, Western Australia, and South Australia. So you can see that New South Wales by far is the biggest market, and has increased quite dramatically over the last few months. Queensland, quite substantial, but it's leveling out. And then you can see Victoria in the middle there. The level of installations have come off dramatically because we're in stage 4 lockdown, but slowly coming out. And I just identify on the far right-hand side that we've seen a significant growth, a surge in installations in South Australia. So South Australia, New South Wales increasing quite dramatically. Victoria has tanked. Okay, so what's been happening? Why has that occurred? We've seen rising wholesale prices, although feed-in tariffs are now starting to fall, and wholesale prices are now starting to fall. We've seen an increased size of residential systems. As I mentioned, we're hitting 7 kilowatts per system. Install costs have come down. Electricity is in the news. Perhaps a little bit less so these days, but certainly over the last couple of years, you couldn't open a paper without reading about electricity, either reliability or higher prices. Funny enough, COVID-19 seems to have supported residential installations. We think that solar has benefited from the increase in focus on home renovation now that everyone's been at home. And so we've actually seen a number of systems increase when we had expected it to fall. The exception there is, of course, Victoria, because we're in hard stage 4 lockdown. And one of the other observations that we can make is that it looks like resources are being diverted from Victoria into other states. So, we have heard that some solar businesses are diverting their installation teams to New South Wales or even South Australia. Okay, how will we go beyond 2020? So a little bit of crystal ball. So I'm going to touch on a couple of the headwinds. The first one I'm going to touch on is minimum demand and negative prices. Don't worry too much about this chart, but you can find out, if you're interested in finding out a lot more about what's happened recently, check out Watt Clarity or Global Roam. And this just happened, or just the other week. And so what intrigued me was the headline of this Watt Clarity article: the decline to zero continues. So we're starting to hit minimum demand. So in other words, there's low levels of demand that we haven't seen before in most NEM jurisdictions, and including the NEM as a whole. And I've highlighted or I've circled the 278 megawatts that South Australia's hit just recently. And why that's important? That's important for a couple of reasons, but we expect that there's going to be around 300 megawatts or more of PV installed in South Australia this year. And so you don't have to think too much about, we can't keep this level of installations going. We're going to have massive negative demand. And interestingly, this is a real issue now for AEMO, who manages the electricity market, and they dedicated a whole chapter in their latest statement of opportunities, looking at the issue of minimum demand, some of the potential problems with managing voltage, system strength, inertia, and I highlighted there in this extract from their statement of opportunities, urgent action is required, and South Australia is moving on that, and I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So starting to see some headwinds. That's rolling out into a hollowing out of daytime prices. So we've got negative prices, quite a lot of negative prices in the middle of the day when solar's, when there's a lot of solar, both rooftop and large scale. And so we're starting to see wholesale prices fall dramatically during those times. And there's a chart here from the AEMC electricity price trends report, which shows you what's likely to roll out over the next couple of years. And their projections of solar PV were conservative. In fact, all projections of solar PV have been conservative, including ours. And so that's going to be exacerbated. We're now starting to see the lower wholesale prices feed in through lower feed-in tariffs, as was announced by the Essential Services Commission in Victoria in July this year. There's other changes that are looming. The South Australian battery standards, which is being implemented now. So you're not going to be able to install, the South Australian PV inverter standards, which is being rolled out. So you're not going to be able to install a PV system without having an inverter capable of being turned off and someone to actually manage that. We're now starting to see more time of use prices rolled out by networks, which is really working to reduce prices during daytime hours. And there's even some proposals to charge solar PV generators for export. So all of these things are going to make batteries a lot more attractive. And a couple of other trends worth watching. The level of out-of-pockets for the installation of a solar system is going to increase. And the main reason for that is that the level of STCs that you can create is dropping every year with basically the renewable energy target being finished by 2030. So this is a chart from a report we did for the Clean Energy Regulator. And there's a whole lot more information on that if you wanted to go into more detail. Included in the same report was we're starting to see high levels of saturation in the residential market. So there's particularly South Australia and Queensland, very high levels of saturation. Now we've looked at the number of systems installed and then looked at that as a proportion of owner-occupied detached and semi-detached homes. So they're really, really high numbers, approaching 70%, or will over the next couple of years. This is Green Energy Markets put together a report for the AEMO looking at solar and battery projections out to 2050. Now, I'm not going to have enough time to go into this in too much detail, so I won't dwell on it, other than to say there are a number of scenarios, and probably the high DER or step change are the ones we're sort of we seem to be going along at the moment for solar PV. I'll just a couple of highlight points, and there's some charts and information if you wanted to follow up with that. But daytime solar prices expected to fall. The peak prices are rising. The residential PV economics will deteriorate until the cost of batteries reduces sufficiently. That will then lead to a significant slowdown in the level of system installations. So these two charts are number of systems for residential and commercial. And so in the long term, we thought that the level of new installations will pretty well track the level of new home starts, but the actual annual market for sale of solar systems will be much higher because we're going to start to upgrade and replace a whole lot of the smaller systems that were installed a couple of years ago. COVID-19 drop did not lead to a reduction in solar installations as we had expected in the report, other than Victoria. In fact, the opposite's happened. We believe it's supported it. I'm going to run out of time, and I'm just going to highlight the fact that the New South Wales government is introducing a demand reduction scheme. And there's some references here to that, but we're expecting a new certificate type to be created, a peak energy reduction certificate or something similar, and it will reward a reduction in peak demand. Batteries will be eligible for that, and we also see that as supporting the New South Wales government's policy initiative to support 300,000 solar and batteries installations over the next 10 years. So watch this space, really important initiative that could help drive battery installations over the next couple of years. And I've got the last dot point there, which is about the South Australian Retailer Energy Productivity Scheme, which is being consulted on at the moment and will be changed into next year to actually also support and reward demand reduction, including batteries. So watch this space. We're seeing some really important policy moves at the state level that will support batteries and demand reductions more broadly. So just finally, wholesale prices in the middle of the day are going to drop dramatically. That means solar PV is going to be less attractive. We expect to see residential systems slow down. Commercial systems, we believe, will be maintained, and we expect the replacement market to grow over time. And obviously it goes without saying that batteries will become increasingly important to support the economics of PV, particularly as a demand reduction measure. So I've got a little bit over time, but thank you for your patience, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks so much for such an in-depth summary of the year. Some very interesting trends going on there. We can be so focused in this industry on what's next. So it's really nice to sit back and look of everything that we've accomplished as an industry, but also what opportunities we have that will come up that will better support us going forward. Some very exciting things to come. Thank you. Just a reminder to everyone watching this session, you can post your questions in the Q&A box, and we will try and answer those at the end of the session. I would now like to introduce Ewan. Ewan is the founder and CEO of Smart Commercial Solar, one of Australia's leading commercial solar providers and energy analysts. He is a commercial solar pioneer who built an elite math-centric system, developed sophisticated system monitoring and analytical processes, and created innovation that allows businesses to get solar installations for no upfront costs while lowering their electricity bills. He and his team have been shortlisted for the Australian Shell Innovation Award and earned a top 10 finish in Anthil's annual awards. Huon's vision is to raise the standard of commercial solar and establish solar as Australia's go-to power source. Welcome, Huon.
Thanks, Sam. It's
Sorry
good to be here.
that.
Not a problem at all. Yeah, thanks very much to all the speakers. We work closely both with FEMA and Rick, and actually Selectronics as well. So I'm going to be recycling some of the information that you've just heard because we're of a similar mindset, all of us. But really, I took on this discussion to really to discuss whether batteries make financial sense, and if not, why not? And more importantly, when do they? And also another question I wanted to answer is how some of you are actually selling batteries. So the solar cliff, which we were just talking about, every year I talk at All Energy, and you know, thanks to Rick, we've just had that articulated very nicely. But basically, the diminishing value of energy value in the middle of the day, caused by a lot of solar coming into the market, basically requires us, if we want to have a solar industry in the future, requires a lot of storage, something in the range of 1 to 2 gigawatts to make a difference, and to soak up some of that excess energy in the day, and also to help provide for the ramp in the afternoon into the evening peaks. And so I'm going to just throw in some other graphs here. I know you've had a lot of graphs today already, but this is an Andy Warhol art piece. Remarkably depicts the energy market, and in the black line there you can see the compensation that coal is making to make way for the massive uptake of rooftop and commercial solar and grid scale solar hitting the market. But what it shows you is that at some point coal becomes an issue, because you can't just have a coal system ramping up and down easily to soak up demand. But who am I, and why do I have some authority to speak on the subject? Well, Smart Commercial Solar sells energy projects on a financial basis.
I'm so sorry, Huon. I just wanted to let you know that unfortunately we can't see your presentation. Are you able to share that? I'd love to see the Andy Warhol piece.
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
No, you're fine.
I better share my screen then.
Yeah, that would be great.
Let's do this.
Perfect.
Sorry, guys. There we go. So that was the solar ramp I was talking about, and this is the Andy Warhol art piece. Apologies, the technical issues there. Hopefully you can see that. And yeah, so we're really about producing really good returns for a return on investment, both for our end users, our clients, and also for our fund. Also, I live off grid, and therefore developed a love-hate relationship with batteries. And I've sliced and diced pretty much every battery technology on the market. LG Chem, BYD, Tesla, Power Plus, flooded lead acid, gel, tube cell gel, flat plate, nickel iron, you name it, I've had a crack at it. And yeah, so it's all interesting if you like spending money. But my question is, can you actually get that money back? The best test of a financial viability is whether or not you can PPA the product. So we were the first company to provide commercial behind the meter PPAs in Australia. We were then the first company to provide a cashback performance guarantee. And so we're very much about making our customers a financial product. We've gone on to bundle PPAs with other hardware, with cashbacks, with payment holidays, and all sorts of things to help our customers save money. But I'm significantly challenged by battery technology, especially on a small scale. Here is a battery we installed in Alice Springs for a small local hammer shop. It's 600 kilowatt hours of storage and 450 kilowatts of solar. It's got a mix of AC and DC coupling. And in this case, we were actually able to achieve a really good result for the client. Because they got high tariffs, the LGCs at that time were quite high. And we were able to get about a 6-year break even on this particular product. But this is quite an unusual case. Here's another fun project that we did just recently. This is Richard White. He's Australia's 17th richest man. He's a self-made billionaire. Really nice guy. Totally loves his new solar system, which is 100 kilowatt SunPower X21s on Tigos with SMA, and a 232 kilowatt hour Tesla power pack, which is a commercial battery. It has 3-phase full off-grid operation with a specialized anti-islanding function. And it's completely nuts for a home, but it's brilliant. And this is him. Richard gave it a bash the other day, as he said. He turned literally every appliance he could possibly find on, and brought his total load to peak at 68 kilowatts in the middle of the day there. And his battery still reached 100% by 1:30 in the afternoon. He is the only guy that I know who's probably going to survive the zombie apocalypse because of his electric cars, his Teslas, and he's now completely self-sufficient in terms of energy. But where do batteries add value? And we've heard a little bit about it today. The ultimate test of a financially sensible investment for any energy product is when we can finance it and have a cash positive result, or a break even within its life cycle, or well before the end of its life. And each of these factors can provide some value back to the battery owner. And I looked at each one to really see how it stacks up. So we'll talk about behind the meter grid energy reduction, which is basically supplying kilowatt hours into the load. We'll talk about demand management on load side demand management. And then we can talk about how we use a battery outside of the residence or outside of the premises to play on the spot market, which is to buy and sell energy out of the NEM. And then we'll talk about FCAS, which is the short injections of power or pulling power out of the grid to create new revenues. And then there's other decision making that goes into helping prove a financial case. Maybe you need a UPS, or there's grid backup functions in unreliable parts of the grid. So they're the 5 functions that batteries can help generate a saving or a revenue or a source of value. But dumb batteries are pretty much, well, the reason I called it dumb batteries is because most batteries are being used, most batteries on the market now are pretty dumb. You can see here, the load here is in blue. This is a commercial load. It ramps up in the morning, and as solar comes up, it then meets the daytime needs of the site and then starts to charge the battery. In this particular case, once the battery is full, the solar is no longer allowed to export, and so it's curtailed just to meet the daytime demand. And then as solar decreases in the afternoon, then the battery begins to discharge. It's relatively unintelligent because it simply charges and discharges. There's no other revenue streams, and in this particular case, we're not allowed to use it to play in the market. And so I thought, well, most people are buying residential systems, and I thought, let's just run a simple break even for a dumb battery in a residential scenario. I used a 15 kilowatt hour battery, which could be Tesla, BYD, or LG. An average system these days is 6.6 kilowatts. I decided to be really generous and say it was cheap at 22 grand installed. I'm going to say I can use the battery to 90% of its capacity with only 3% degradation year on year. And I thought I'd put this battery up in southern Queensland where there's lots of sun at 1450 kilowatt hours per year. And I'm going to assume that all energy is being used both out of the sun, off the solar, and out of the battery at a really high tariff structure of 35 cents per kilowatt hour. And even with all those metrics, the simple break even still gets us somewhere just under year 8. So it's not exactly the most attractive feasibility study. So then I tested batteries based on PPAs at different buy prices. And basically I had a look at, well, if I was to sell a battery installed at cost right now, what would my energy price need to be to justify the investment on a PPA? And basically, if you can get a PPA down at 8%, you're doing well. And so I set the bar really low with a minimum IRR of 8%. And at the moment, a battery would need the tariff structure to be at about 34 cents per kilowatt hour in terms of its revenue to make financial sense. So I brought the price down by 25%, which would then lower the energy price to about 24 cents per kilowatt hour. If I was getting that, I'd be okay. But ultimately, if we're going to compete in the commercial space, which is by far the largest consumer of energy, we're going to need the batteries to come down at least half what their retail price currently is. So yeah, it's hard to financially justify in terms of just using it for kilowatt hours in a dumb battery scenario. And then I thought, well, let's have a look at demand management. If we're using, so demand management, for those who don't know, demand can constitute about 60% of a commercial energy bill. This is the charge for that single point of high demand that the site uses, which can cost a lot of money. That single moment might be worth, $16 per kVA, but it's not an exact science to be able to offset demand. One, you need a momentary spike rather than sustained demand because your battery just has a finite capacity. And then you also need to hope that your customer's load isn't some sort of weather dependent or weather correlated event. So you don't want to have a customer who has high humidity and cloud cover with a high demand for energy because your battery just won't have the power or the state of charge to accommodate the full need. So it's not an exact science at all. And it's very hard for us to make promises to our client on their net results if we don't finitely model how their load is going to behave in relation to the battery that we propose. So we didn't get a lot of love out of offsetting demand either. From one of our friends, we had a look at, okay, let's start taking this battery not just for our behind the meter needs, but out into the national energy market. And in the national energy market, we can sell energy or buy energy, and we can use FCAS to derive revenues as well. And this is the New South Wales spot market for the last year. If we were to be buying or selling into the spot, these are the half-hour increment prices per megawatt hour that we would have received. And if we were playing with a battery, we might make a decision that allows us to sell this energy into the grid during these high-price market events. So maybe you would say that, well, my battery is worth playing on the market. I have extra charge. I might sell into the grid when power is worth $150 per megawatt hour or 15 cents per kilowatt hour. I might use it to sell into the grid. And there are certainly moments when that energy is worth a lot of money, $14,000 per megawatt hour. There was a 2.5 hour increment within the last year that generated $48,000 in 2.5 hours for anyone with 1 meg of power to spill into the grid at that point. So there can be some really good moments, and we would hope, I guess, that some more of those moments come along so that it becomes more valuable for us to play. But obviously you need to have energy to discharge in at those moments. And then comes frequency control ancillary services, FCAS. So the FCAS market is how the Hornsdale battery in South Australia got a 2.5 year break even, but it is an isolated location. It's an isolated situation, really. It's an unusual market. It was an unusual market, but FCAS is going to change as more and more battery becomes available, and there's more participants competing to play into that market. So basically we can't guarantee prices on FCAS much longer than 3 years, or we can't expect to see the FCAS market stay as buoyant as it has been, at least for the foreseeable future, maybe 1 or 2, 3 years perhaps. But basically, yeah, injecting short bursts of energy into the grid can be valuable at some points, and a battery is perfect for playing into those. The reason FCAS market actually exists is because demand and supply don't always match each other. And a battery can play in 6 seconds, 60 seconds, and 5 minute, that's meant to be 5 minute FCAS markets. And you can play in all 3 markets at once, and you can play in supply and, or you can play in raise and lower markets at the same time as well. So batteries are really dynamic, and the actual problem's really caused by spinning reserve in the form of coal. But perhaps as coal comes off, there's less inertia, there's less, well, the school's out really. The problem of FCAS is actually caused by coal, and it's going to be solved by solar and battery and wind. But it's a contentious subject. At the moment, coal remains to be the largest player in the FCAS market. So that's interesting as we pull more coal assets out. So I wanted to talk about smart batteries. What is a smart battery? A smart battery is a battery that does all of the above. It's a managed battery. And so we're doing some work with Evergen, who some of you may know, who's very sophisticated approach to battery management for grid response, both in terms of behind the meter demand management and then grid side arbitrage and FCAS, allows us to get better financial results for our clients. And this is one particular client. This is the result of our effort by putting in an extra 100 kilowatt system and a Tesla power pack. Evergen's IC software will delay the charge of the battery until peak and shoulder, the discharge of the battery until peak and shoulder times. And it will also initiate off-peak charging to meet the demands of the more expensive periods playing on the grid. So the load profile of this site before, which already has 100 kilowatt systems, and after, the decrease in peak demand and consumption from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. far outweighs the off-peak increase. And peak times where consumption cannot be met is due to basically the inverter capacity limitations. Smart batteries revenues are gained from these 5 areas basically. 7 areas: peak, shoulder, and off-peak energy, peak demand, shoulder demand, and off-peak demand, and then the 12% there is FCAS. So in a ratio for this particular client, and not every client is the same, it depends very much on the load profile and the behavior of the site, but we can see that's where we're going to derive some revenue. And this is an interesting result for this particular client. The original cost for this client were $61,000. With a dumb battery, they would save roughly half of that. But with a managed battery playing in all those markets at the same time, the managed battery gets about 50% higher returns. Unfortunately, though, we're still only getting to an 8-year break even for this particular client. And just in the last point, offsetting other costs. There's a number of reasons why people want batteries. It's not always logical, but there are some really logical ones. And that is when a customer is getting to the edge of their transformer capacity, or the street can't take any more power, or they need to upgrade lines, or they just need a UPS function, they have regular blackouts, and then assessing what is the cost of a loss in productivity for a blackout, or in a meat store, for example, or a cold store, what's the cost of the loss of the produce in the cool rooms. And then there's a lot of other reasons. Most people do it because they want to be cool, and I'll have what she's having, and the solar guy told me that batteries are great, or Elon Musk spoke to them in a dream, or something like that. Or you just want to have energy independence, and they're all great reasons. So look, I now know the answer. Do they make financial sense? I also know the answer to the question, when do they make financial sense? And I think I know the answer as to how some of you guys are selling these batteries, but definitely the future is selling smart batteries. So it's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Thanks, Sam. And I hope people come and speak to us after on.
Thank you, Ewan. Some very neat installations there. Thank you for sharing all of those solutions you and your team have come up with. It's really important that we create custom solutions for customer needs. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario for sure. And you're right, financial sense or payback might not be the number one priority. I mean, I personally haven't had a dream about Elon Musk, but other people might. Thank you so much. Our last speaker today is Rod Scott. Rod is the CEO of Cellectronic Australia, a family-owned Australian manufacturer since 1964, and a founding supporter of the CEC. Rod's involvement in the renewables industry has recently become like a return to his past with IT, big data and communications now playing a significant part. Rod is passionate about championing Australian manufacturing in the industry, with an Australian supply chain contributing over 83% of Australian-made components for the renowned Cellectronic SP Pro inverter, ranging from 3 kilowatts to 240 kilowatts in battery voltages of 24 volts, 48 volts, and 120 volts, and can be used in both on-grid and off-grid systems. I personally met Rod at a rooftop bar in Austria, and then again in Germany. I seem to meet him in pubs a lot, and I hope that we are able to share an Aperol Spritz soon, Rod. Please welcome Rod.
Great. Thank you, Sam. And I do share your sentiment. We hope that we can get out of lockdown here soon, so we can go and share those drinks locally rather than just overseas. I wanted to talk today about the opportunity of being able to rebuild and do things, I guess, a little bit differently to what we've done before after the extreme conditions we've been through this year. One result of those extreme conditions I found, I'm sure others may not have the same problem, but that little installation of at the local swimming pool and gym that's shown in the picture there, I have not been to since March. And unfortunately, it is showing those COVID calories or kilograms, as I call them. But I want to talk about the fact that, you know, the shape of our clothes need to be flexible sometimes, and our solutions on the grid also have to be flexible, because we got a very wide variety of topologies in this grid here in Australia. So we certainly have some challenges when it comes to that. I'm aware we're a little bit behind time, so I'm going to quickly skip over the fact that we've been doing energy storage and power electronics for many, many years now. It's all designed and manufactured here in Australia, which we're very proud of. So yes, for a long, long time, different products. Current product range, as you can see there, with our monitoring as well as our SP Pro, and the power chain functionality has now just been released. We make it here and we deliver it around the world as well as here. And we reached a milestone a couple of years ago of 200,000 serial number. And Tony Smith, the Speaker of the House, helped us celebrate that occasion. The reason why I might have lost a bit of hair since I saw you last was because we're moving next week into our new premises, and there's been quite a bit of fit out work happening. But it's really exciting to be moving to a premises where we've been able to do some specific fit outs and design on the premises to allow us to continue the manufacturing and to do it better here in Australia as well. So it's been a year, as we had talked about, and it's been a big year in so many ways. Earlier this year, and we might have forgotten a bit about this because of COVID-19, I was down at Cowes in Phillip Island, at the jetty, when I saw this Navy ship going past, and a couple of others as well, going into Western Port Bay. So they were rescuing people who were stranded in Mallacoota. That was one of the fire areas that hit a lot of homes, huge areas within Victoria, as well as New South Wales and South Australia. It seems like COVID's almost overtaken that, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking about that and just think about the opportunity that we have to do things better, to actually allow the resilience of the grid to be there when most needed in these extreme events. One event that Sam didn't mention that we last caught up with each other was actually in Parliament House in Canberra early this year. They had a rebuilding after the bushfires summit. The thing I liked about it was it was a bipartisan type summit. So it was all parties and levels of Parliament getting together to really work out the better way of doing things and support those who have been really badly affected by these fires. Just came through, and this was a reminder to me as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, one of our customers sent this through. I don't know if this will. I just wanted to just remind. There's no sound to this, but just to remind the gravity. He had to evacuate his property, but just the enormity of those fires and just how huge they were, and that was just a CCTV camera on his property. And so that's what it looked like after the fires went through. He had a power system inside his container there, including one of our Raspberry Pros, as you can possibly make out there with the lights, the LEDs still flashing through the charcoal on the cover there. Quite amazingly, that still operated for him after he actually still had power connected to his property, even though unfortunately the residential home and all the training area had been destroyed. But this is a reminder, I guess, to say, well, what are we going to do to really help these people next time when they're facing these sort of extreme conditions? So my thought is, well, really, I think we would probably agree and that electricity is an essential service. We really need to consider it that way. And if it is, then my question is, how is it acceptable that this system fails to deliver, often fails to deliver at critical times? Like it could be storms, it could be fires, these times when the actual electricity delivery is so important. And the effect that it's had on so many communities, these fires in particular, just the most recent ones, and we know this has happened so many times over the years, is really quite devastating. And it's not just the ones that have lost their properties, but also those who have been without power for many weeks afterwards. And as much as I know in speaking to various communities up at Parliament House and so on, very appreciative of the efforts that the utilities made in providing generators and getting the crews out there very, very fast, there was still an issue of quite a negative effect that it had on the communities, especially when they were in the rebuilding phase as well. So my thoughts here is, well, let's put more effort in up front to avoid power loss during these times, rather than sort of just thinking about, running around reactively afterwards. So the target groups, I guess, are the homes that are at high risk, say in fire areas, the emergency power to the emergency services, so fire services, SES, etc. Very important that we back those up. And emergency power to key buildings, so for example, a fire refuge is really important during these times as well. And the at-risk areas of the grid. So there are parts of the grid that is at risk with the fires, for example, or it may have to be shut down due to fire risk. So I've got a couple of examples here. I wanted to just go through those different areas. And one of them is, this is like two properties I want to talk about that are not far from each other. They had different outcomes with their systems and the way they're approached. So this one was, this one is in Clifton Creek and Gippsland. So they're both in Gippsland. This one they had sprinkler systems, they had backup power. They were told to evacuate, so they went and evacuated. Fortunately, they were able to run their sprinkler systems during the night with their system. They were able to look and see online what was happening with the system, so they could tell the sprinklers were still running. They returned home the next day. Property was saved, fortunately, but the key thing was that they were able to still have power as well. They didn't lose power like the rest of the community did. This one was a story that was published, and we had John go down and talk to this John as well. And the idea here was this guy's he knows he lives in a very high fire risk area. So he built this property quite specifically for fire, and he also built the whole sprinkler system. It's got a reliable power system. When the fire went through his property, it left everything was preserved. Fortunately, his rainforest, his house, everything was preserved, and the sprinkler system used 150,000 litres. So that's a good reason why it would have. But the fact is, it was able to keep going, and he was able to defend his property. So that's another way of looking at this. He didn't lose his property, but he also was able to choose to stay and defend. If you want to look at this actual article, it's got photos of before and after his property for aerial view. It's quite amazing. This is really just an example of what typically people should be doing that are in fire risk areas. So here's a house that it's all electric, so it's got very high power usage, electricity usage. They decided that because they're in a high fire risk area, they wanted to put on a system that's going to give them continuous power, but also save quite a bit on their power bills by having the solar and having the self-consumption and all those benefits that Hewan quite well described, or the in front of the meter and behind the meter, in this case behind the meter, benefits of having that the solar and the storage. As far as key buildings, so this was a system that was put on to the Nillumbik Community Centre that's designed to be a fire refuge for the area. Again, you're going to want power during that time, so you want to make sure that you've got a reliable system. The thing about these systems, though, is they don't sit there waiting for the next fire. They are providing all those stacked benefits that has been described by Hewan, and it's really a smart system in that it's giving all those benefits, but it's also ready for when extreme events occur. So examples of helping those who help us. This is the SES Emergency Services down in Mallacoota, and again they had a system put on there so that if the grid goes down during extreme events, they can continue to operate and have power in their station there. And again, at Yackandandah, the CFA there had a battery system put on with their solar, put on the hall as well, so their community hall in Yackandandah. The interesting thing about these two installations is it helps the emergency services, helps the community, but it also ties in with the VPP that is throughout Yackandandah. So there's actually lots of homes that have been rolling out with battery, and some with just solar, but some with battery and solar. So that performs that VPP in that community. So they're actually saving money. They're actually getting reliable power in the community because they were struggling before, and they're also ready for extreme events and fires. So where to from here? And I guess what Hewan was saying quite accurately is it doesn't always make that much sense to have batteries, or the stack benefits can add up, but it might be a longer payoff. And I guess what I'm saying here is if we add those stack benefits to the fact that you get these non-tangible benefits like reliable power and a resilient grid, especially where you need it in extreme events, that's going to really give us a good motivation to just push ahead and be able to then provide this sort of resilient system using the building blocks we've got now. Because there's really nothing that we need to be putting into place that we don't already know how to do. It's just a matter of having the will to do more of it and to realise the benefit to those who are in these at-risk areas, I guess. So if we use those building blocks, including embedded microgrids, taking the some of the remote consumers off grid, which has been happening now. So, for example, if you take a consumer off grid that might have a 3-kilometre swirl line, well, that swirl line doesn't have to exist anymore. And that swirl line could have been quite a fire risk as well. So there's a lot of different benefits in that way, and really we need to be also, when we take customers off grid, then the considerations for the off grid system has to be, for example, the fact that the utilities have supply standards of the grid. They have to allow for the customer load profile, and they have to give reliable power. It can't be just the customer worrying about are the batteries going flat. It has to be just set and forget. And we have to also allow for even things like tripping breakers, which the appropriate surge current has to be available to act in accordance to those technical requirements. And so I guess what I'm saying is, if we really consider electricity as essential, then we can start protecting lives, property, and the environment in a better way. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. You're so passionate about helping the end user. It's really good to hear you reflect on what your battery and solar systems are doing for customers in catastrophic times, and what the environment has been doing too. So thank you very much for that. We will just jump into questions. There's a couple of here. So this one here is for you, Rod. Smoke had dreadful effects on solar productions. What do you think about hybrid systems that include PV and batteries and diesel generators, noting that gensets are at peak efficiency when driving max rated power and using that to top up batteries?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because during the actual fires and the smoke did hang around for a long time, then the PV generation wouldn't be optimum for sure. So we would always encourage, regardless of the reasons for having an off-grid system, we would always suggest that you have a backup generator, so that, because there are times when it's just not going to be enough renewable generation to get you through. What happens though often is after a storm, the sun does come out, but if the grid's down, you've still got no power. So having that system that can be islanded from the grid and can be running and taking whatever renewable system it can get, that's a great way. But certainly, and the fact that a generator is sitting there and actually be used in a smart way as well. So the generator, when it is actually used to, in a diesel recharge way, it's running at optimum performance by actually the inverter charging the batteries at the optimum rate that the diesel runs at.
Thank you. Ewan, this looks like a question for you, or maybe a comment or thoughts for you. One thing that is holding back the deployment of smart management of batteries are the regulations and tariff structure. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think everyone's hoping to be able to trade energy in effect from each home into a VPP or into the NEM, but at the moment the cost and the ability to do that is not really there, and there's no real great mechanism to do it. A lot of people are talking about it. The technology certainly exists. Pretty much every battery that is connected to a Grid Connect home is probably ready to play. And I think it's just the platform that everyone is prepared to play with. I don't know enough about the regulation. Maybe Rick probably has a view on it, but yeah.
There is some changes in the to introduce the wholesale demand response mechanism, which is coming, which the legislation's passed is coming next year, I think from October next year. The only problem though is it only covers sort of, let's call it large business consumers, so it does not include residential. I think the intention is over time to include residential once they deal with some of the privacy and sort of customer protection issues. So no, you're absolutely right. You definitely can't do it at the moment. You'll be able to do it through a wholesale demand response in October for larger consumers. And the only mechanism you've got now is to work through your local retailer, is the only mechanism to do it now.
Okay, I might just open this up to all panelists. Was the Yak initiative part of the Tri Community Hub that AusNet Mondo have installed there? Does anyone know that answer?
Well, I know that one because
Awesome.
yeah. So Yakandanda, so Tri stands for Totally Renewable Yakandanda, which is a great initiative, and it actually is a great example, if nothing else, showing that what a particular community can do when they get together and they've got the will to make it happen. And so they had issues with power, reliability, and capacity to their little town of about 1,000 people, and they decided, and that's where AusNet came in, because it did actually defer asset augmentation of the grid to allow for that capacity issue. And they were able to put in microgrids and using the Mondo system for the VPP there. And it was a great, it's actually a really good success story. And so it's both giving good, reliable power to the community, as well as being able to make them more fire ready for the future as well. And they're trying to replicate that throughout other country towns as well, around Victoria and Australia.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more question. Jason, any new substation ABB 1 megawatt GESS battery system and prospects for more?
Okay, well, that's probably a little bit of a complicated question, considering FEMA's not part of ABB anymore, but of course I'm familiar with what Bernie's talking about. So, I mean, ABB will continue to do their own thing in battery storage. So I know they're working on stuff. So I'm sure we'll see more systems like that. But from the FEMA side of things, I mean, we also work in that space as well. We're focusing on residential and utility grid scale at the moment, but we're hoping to do some more stuff in the commercial space over time. So yeah, sorry, not really a good way to answer that question, but hopefully that's given a little bit of information.
Great, thank you. Thank you all the speakers today. We've had an amazing panel. You've really shared some enlightening and critical information to ensure our industry supports sustainability both on and off grid. So thank you so much for your time. And I think there's just a video we'll play now to close the session. Thank you, guys.